Hi, and welcome to another night in with the Music Hall. We are so thrilled to see restaurants and stores in Terrytown and throughout the region being able to reopen again and return some level of normalcy to our lives again. We don't know when the Music Hall will be able to open again, and we won't do so until it's safe for everyone involved. But when we do, we have a lot of artists who can't wait to see you again. Until then, thank you so much to all our benefactors out there who help us stay afloat. If you want to join them, go to our website, sign up as a member, sponsor, donor, benefactor, you name it. We need you. Until we can meet again, grab some food from your favorite local restaurant and enjoy another night in with the Music Hall. Hope to see you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, fellow scientists and assorted intellectuals, to a very special meeting of the Lower Mid-Hudson Valley Society for the Advancement of the Arcane and Unknowable. I am Society President Arthur Billingsley III, and it is my extreme pleasure to introduce tonight's guest lecturer, Professor George G. Angel. He's a renowned expert, both ancient linguistics and mystical inscriptions, with a vast knowledge of human antiquity, as well as lesser cultures predating our own. Professor Angel will be presenting momentous information regarding the discovery of new evidence suggesting that the initial residents of this region may indeed have been sentient. The Lower Mid-Hudson Valley Society for the Advancement of the Arcane and Unknowable thanks Bjorn Olsen Esquire for the use of his family's ancestral chamber for this evening's lecture, as well as for the seeing to the care and feeding of our guests' carriage horses for the duration of the event. The program is expected to last up to but not exceeding 1 hour, which time Professor Angel will be available for questioning regarding his intriguing views on antiquity. Spirits, libations, quality cigars, and fine Turkish opium will be made available at that time. Anyone interested in joining the Lower Mid-Hudson Valley Society for the Advancement of the Arcane and Unknowable should inquire with Lord Colton Suarez. He can be identified by his shiny bald pate and also his lazy eye. And now, without further ado, I give you Professor Angel.
What are you doing? Don't turn it on! It's too dangerous! Oh dear. This is the point where I would wish you all a good evening. But I fear there is little good about it. If you're watching this, I'm sorry. It was not my intention to place your lives in jeopardy this evening, but I fear my actions have done precisely that. I foolishly thought I had more time. If you're watching this presentation, your lives are now forfeit. They will assume you know the forbidden truth and will hunt you down accordingly. Pleas of ignorance will fall upon deaf ears. May God forgive me. God. God. I had hoped to entrust each of you with a singular and unique piece of an apocalyptic puzzle in a Herculean effort to scatter the damnable clues to the four corners of the earth and ensure that none ever again glimpse the wretched hole. However, as you were all fated to die, you deserve to know why. The truth will not set you free, mind you. But it may provide some solace before you descend into madness. But where to begin? Where does one start with a story which spans eons and challenges the very notions of reality? The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of vast seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in their own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightening position therein. We shall all either go mad from the revelations or flee the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Not long ago, there came a single glimpse into forbidden eons which chills me when I think of it and maddens me when I dream of it. My own knowledge of the thing began a few short years ago, in the spring of 1925. Although, in fact, it began many years earlier. Fact of which I was not aware at the time. Forgive me. My name is George Gamel Angel, Professor Emeritus, Semitic Languages, Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. I have been for some time a known authority on ancient inscriptions and have been resorted to frequently by the heads of prominent museums. But on March 1st, 1925, March 1st. March 1st, 1925. A thin young man called upon me, bearing a singular clay bas-relief, exceedingly fresh and damp. I have it here. It's rectangular in shape, less than an inch thick, but 5 by 6 inches in area. Obviously of modern origin. The designs, however, are anything but modern in atmosphere and suggestion. Though the vagaries of fatalism and cubism are indeed many and wild, they do not yet reproduce that cryptic regularity which lurks in prehistoric writing. For writing of some kind, these designs certainly appear to be, though my memory fails at any attempt to identify this particular species, or indeed form the remotest of linguistic affiliations. In the midst of these apparent hieroglyphics is an image of evidently pictorial intent, although its impressionistic expression forbids any true ideas to its nature. It appears to be a monster, or a symbol representing a monster, but of a form only a diseased fancy could conceive. If I say my somewhat extravagant imagination yields simultaneous images of an octopus, dragon, and human caricature, I should not be too far from the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounts a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. It is the general aspect of the whole that is most shockingly frightful. Beyond the figures, the vague suggestion, cyclopean architectural background. The young man bore the name Henry Anthony Wilcox. He was a precocious youth of known genius but great eccentricity, who had since childhood attracted attention from the strange stories and odd dreams he was in the habit of relating. Never mingling much with his own kind, he'd gradually dropped from social visibility. Even the Providence Art Club, anxious to preserve their conservatism, found the young man to be quite hopeless. But on the occasion of his visit, the sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of my archaeological knowledge in identifying the hieroglyphics upon his bas-relief. I'm afraid I was a bit short with the man. Well, the conspicuous freshness of the tablet implies kinship with, well, anything but archaeology. Young Wilcox's rejoinder, however, was of a fantastically poetic cast. He said, "It is new, for I made it last night in a dream of strange cities, and dreams are older than the contemplative Sphinx or garden-girded Babylon." It was then that he began a rambling tale that suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won my fevered interest. There had been a slight earth tremor the night before. Wilcox's imagination had been keenly affected. Upon retiring, he'd had an unprecedented dream of giant cyclopean cities with titan stone blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and latent with sinister horror. Hieroglyphics covered all the walls and pillars, and from some undetermined point below came a voice. It was not a voice, but a chaotic sensation which only fancy could transmute into sound, but which nonetheless he attempted to render with the almost unpronounceable jumble of letters. Cthulhu Fatang. Cthulhu Fatang. It was this jumble of letters that was the key to the recollection which disturbed and excited me. I questioned the young man with scientific minuteness, studied with feverish intensity the bas-relief. I'm afraid many of my questions seemed highly out of place to the young man, particularly those which attempted to connect him to some sort of cult or society. Poor Wilcox could not understand my repeated promises of silence which were offered in exchange for an admission of membership into some mystical or paganly religious body. When I was convinced that he was indeed ignorant of any cult or system of cryptic lore, I besieged the young man with demands for future reports of dreams. This bore regular fruit. For after our first interview, I received daily calls from the young man, during which time he related startling fragments of nocturnal imagery. He spoke of his dreams in a fairly poetic fashion, making me see with terrifying vividness damp cyclopean cities with slimy green ooze, whose geometry, he said oddly, was all wrong, and making me hear with frightening expectancy that subterranean voice or intelligence shouting out, chanting monotonously that enigmatic, uninscribable save as gibberish call from underground, Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! On March 23rd, Wilcox failed to appear. Inquiries at his residence revealed he had been stricken with an obscure sort of fever and taken to his family's home on Waterman Street. He had cried out in the night of March 22nd, arousing several in the building, and afterwards manifesting only alternations between unconsciousness and delirium. I at once telephoned the family, and from that point forward kept close watch on the case. The young man's febrile mind was dwelling on strange things. These included not only repetition of the things formerly dreamed, but touched wildly on a gigantic thing, miles high, which walked or lumbered abroad. He at no point described this object, but the occasional frantic words convinced me it was identical to the nameless monstrosity he'd sought to depict on his dream sculpture. Then, on April 2nd, April 2nd, at about 3 p.m., Wilcox's malady suddenly ceased. He sat upright in bed, astonished to find himself at home, and utterly ignorant of anything that had taken place, in dream or reality, since the night of March 22nd. Pronounced well by his physician, he returned to his quarters within 3 days. But from that point forward, he was of no further use to me. All traces of strange dreaming had vanished upon his recovery. The reason for my fevered interest in this matter was that once before I had seen the hellish outlines of that nameless monstrosity, puzzled over the unknown hieroglyphics, and heard the ominous syllables which can only be pronounced Cthulhu. The earlier experience had been in 1908, 17 years before. The American Archaeological Society held their annual meeting in St. Louis. I played a prominent role in all of the deliberations. As such, I was one of the first to be approached from the several outsiders who took advantage of our convocation to offer up questions for correct answering and problems for expert solutions. Chief among these outsiders, well, and within a short while the focus of interest of the entire meeting, was a commonplace-looking middle-aged man who had traveled all the way from New Orleans for certain special information unobtainable from any local source. His name was John Raymond LaGrasse, and he was, by profession, an inspector of police. With him, he bore the subject of his visit, a grotesque, repulsive, and apparently very ancient stone statuette, whose origin he was at a loss to determine. This statuette, idol, fetish, whatever it is, had been captured in the wooded swamps south of New Orleans during a raid on a supposed voodoo meeting. But so singular and hideous were the rites associated with it, the police could not but realize they had stumbled upon some dark cult totally unknown to them, infinitely more diabolical than even the most malignant voodoo circles. Of its origins, apart from the unbelievable and erratic tales extracted from the captured members, absolutely nothing was to be discovered. Hence the anxiety of the police for any bit of antiquarian lore which might help them place this terrible object, and through it trace the cult back to its fountainhead. LaGrasse was not prepared for the sensation his offering created. One sight of the thing was enough to send us all into a state of tense excitement, and we lost no time in crowding around the young man. And we lost no time in crowding around the man to glimpse at this diminutive figure whose utter strangeness and air of genuinely abysmal antiquity hinted so potently at unopened, archaic vistas. No recognized school of sculpture had animated this object, yet there were centuries, even thousands of years, recorded on its dim and greenish surface of unplaceable stone. It's vast, awesome, incalculable age is unmistakable. Yet not one link does it show with any known type of art from civilization's youth, or indeed any other time period. Finally, this figure was then passed slowly from man to man for close and careful study. It appears to represent a monster, vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head, whose face is a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on the hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. He squats evilly on this rectangular block or pedestal covered in undecipherable characters. The cephalopod head is bent forward so that the tips of the facial feelers brush the backs of huge forepaws, which in turn clutch the croucher's elevated knees. It is abominably lifelike, and all the more subtly fearful as its source is so totally unknown. Its vast, awesome, incalculable age is unmistakable, yet not one link does it show with any known type of art from civilization's youth, or indeed any other time period. Equally baffling are the characters along the base. And not one of us there, despite being a representation of half the world's expert learning in the field, could form the remotest of linguistic kinship. They, like the figure and the material itself, seem to belong to something horribly remote and distinct from mankind as we know it. Equally unfathomable to us all were the sounds or words which Legras related, hearing his Louisiana swamp priests chant to their kindred idol. He repeated them as best he could, and I have written them down here. Fungluи, Muglunaf, Cthulhu, Relay, Wagadnagul, Fatag. And here the inspector related what several of the captured prisoners told him that older celebrants said the words meant. In his house at Relay, dead Cthulhu waits, dreaming. And now, in response to our urgent demands, Inspector Legras related, as fully as possible, his experience with the swamp worshippers. On November 1st, 1907, the New Orleans Police Department received a frantic summons from the swamp and lagoon country to the south. Squatters there were in the grip of stark terror from some unknown thing which had stolen upon them in the night. It was voodoo, apparently, but a voodoo of a more hideous form than they had ever known. Some of their women and children had disappeared since the malevolent tom-toms began their incessant beating from deep within the black-hearted woods where no dweller ventured. And so, a body of 20 police set out in the late afternoon, the shivering squatter as their guide. At the end of the passable road, they alighted, and for miles splashed on in silence through the dark cypress woods where day never came. Ugly roots and malignant hanging nooses of Spanish moss beset their path. And here and there a dank pile of stones or a fragment of a rotting wall, intensified with their hint at morbid habitation, a depression which every malformed tree and fungus island combined to create. At length, the squatters' settlement, a miserable huddle of huts, hove into sight. The hysterical dwellers ran out and crowded around the group of bobbing lanterns. By now, the muffled beat of the tom-toms was fairly audible in the far distant wood, and a curdling shriek occurred at infrequent intervals when the wind shifted. A reddish glare, too, seemed to filter through the pale undergrowth beyond endless avenues of forest night. Each one of those cowed squatters refused, point blank, to advance another inch towards the source of that unholy worship. And so Legras and his 19 colleagues plunged on unguided into black arcades of horror through which none of them had ever trod before. The region now entered by the police was one of traditionally evil repute, substantially unknown and untraversed by men. There were legends of a hidden lake, unglimpsed by mortal sight, wherein dwelled a huge, formless, white, polypous thing with luminous eyes. The squatters whispered of bat-winged devils which flew out of caverns in inner earth to worship it at midnight. It was nightmare itself, and to see it was to die. Now, only poetry or madness could do justice to the noises which Legras and the others heard, coming from deep within that dark, haunted woods of ancient legendary and terror. There are vocal qualities peculiar to men, and there are vocal qualities peculiar to beasts. And it is terrible to hear the one when the source should give the other. Animal fury and orgiastic license whipped themselves up to demonic heights with howls and squawking ecstasies which tore and reverberated through the woods like pestilential tempests from the gulfs of hell. Every now and then, the less organized ululations would cease, and then from what seemed a well-drilled chorus of hoarse voices would rise in sing-song chant, that hideous phrase or ritual. Fungui, Mugulnaf, Cthulhu, Relay, Waganagul, Fatang. And now the police, having come to a spot where the trees had thinned, came suddenly in sight of the spectacle itself. 4 of the men reeled, 1 fainted, and 2 were driven to stark cries of terror, which the mad cacophony fortunately deadened. All stood trembling, nearly hypnotized with horror. In a natural glade of the swamp stood a small island of perhaps an acre's extent, cleared of trees, tolerably dry. On it now leaped and twisted an indescribable horde of human abnormality, void of clothing. This hybrid spawn brayed and bellowed and writhed about a great ring-shaped bonfire, the center of which, glimpsed occasionally through rifts in the curtain of flame, stood a great granite monolith of perhaps 8 feet in height, on top of which, incongruous in its diminutiveness, rested this noxious carven statuette. From a ring of 10 scaffolds placed at regular intervals, the flame-girthed monolith in the center, hung, head downwards, the oddly marred bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. It was within this ring that the worshippers leaped and jumped in endless bacchanal, between the ring of bodies and the ring of fire. Now, it may have only been imagination. It may have only been echoes which induced one of the men, an excitable Spaniard, to fancy he heard antiphonal responses to the ritual coming from some place deep within that woods. He even went so far as to hint at the beating of great wings and of a glimpse of shining eyes. The horrified pause of the policeman was of comparatively brief duration. Duty came first, and though there must have been over 100 celebrants in the throng, the police relied on their firearms and plunged determinedly into this noxious rout. For 5 minutes, the resultant din and chaos was beyond description. Wild blows were struck, shots were fired, escapes were made, but in the end, Legras was able to count some 47 sullen prisoners, whom he made to hastily dress and fall in line between two rows of policemen. The figure atop the monolith was taken down and carried back by Legras himself. Examined at headquarters, it became manifest that they were dealing with something far darker and older than mere voodooism. Degraded and ignorant though their captured members were, they held steadfast to the central tenet of their loathsome faith. They worshipped, so they said, great old ones who lived ages before men and came to the young earth out of the sky. The old ones were gone now, inside the earth and beneath the sea, but their dead bodies told their secrets in dreams to the first men who had formed cults which had always been here and which always would be here, hidden away in the distant wastes and lonely places all over the world, waiting for the time that the great priest Cthulhu, from his dark house in the mighty city of Relay beneath the waters, should rise and once again bring the world under his sway. One day his call would come, and this secret cult would be waiting to liberate him. This unbelievable tale returned to my mind with the introduction of the sensitive youth who had dreamed not only the figure in exact hieroglyphs found on this swamp-bound idol, but who had in his dreams come across at least two of the precise words of the formula uttered by those crazed cultists of Louisiana. I at once made preparations to travel to New Orleans and interview Inspector Legras once again. I was sure I was on the trail of a very real, very secret, very ancient religion, whose discovery would make me an anthropologist of note. My plans were brought to a halt upon learning that Inspector Legras had died many years earlier, and under mysterious circumstances. Further research revealed that many of those men who had been there that horrible night in the swamp had come to untimely ends in the intervening years. For the first time, I began to wonder if my inquiries were placing my own life in danger. Unfortunately, or well, perhaps fortunately, Legras's passing brought my investigation to something of a dead end. I largely gave over my inquiries and attempted to restore some semblance of normalcy in my life. Should heaven ever wish to grant me a boon, it would be the total effacing of the mere chance which fixed my eye upon a certain stray piece of shelf paper. It was an old number, Australian journal, the Sydney Bulletin, dated April 18th, 1925. I was visiting a learned friend in Paterson, New Jersey, the curator of a local museum. Examining one day the reserved specimens roughly set aside on a storage shelf in a rear room of the museum, my eye happened upon a picture on one of the papers spread beneath the stones. It was a half-ton stone-cut idol identical to the one Legras found in the swamp. I eagerly cleared the sheet of its precious contents and studied in detail the item, disappointed to find it of only moderate length. What it suggested, however, would have profound significance to my flagging quest. Mystery derelict found at sea. The Morrison Company's freighter, Vigilant, bound for Valparaiso, arrived this morning in Darling Harbor, having in tow the battled and disabled steam yacht Alert of Dunedin, which was sighted April 12th, with one survivor in a half-delirious condition and one man who had evidently been dead for more than a week on board. The living man was clutching a horrible stone idol of unknown origin, regarding whose nature authorities at Sydney University, the Royal Society, and the museum in College Street all profess complete bafflement. This survivor told an exceedingly strange story of piracy and slaughter. He is Gustav Johansen, a Norwegian who had been second mate of the two-masted schooner Emma of Auckland, which sailed February 20th with a complement of 11 men. The Emma, he says, was delayed and thrown widely south of her course by the great storm of March 1st. And then, on March 22nd, she encountered the Alert, manned by a queer and evil-looking crew, which began to fire savagely and without warning upon the schooner. The schooner began to sink from shots beneath the waterline, but the crew managed to heave alongside their enemy and board her, grappling with the savage crew on the yacht's deck and being forced to kill them all. 3 of the Emma's men, including the captain and the first mate, were killed, and the remaining 8, under second mate Johansen, proclaimed to navigate the captured yacht. The next day, it appears, they landed on a small island, although none is known to exist in that part of the ocean. 6 of the men somehow died ashore. Johansen speaks only of their falling into a rock chasm. Later, it seems, he and one companion boarded the yacht and tried to manage her, but were beaten about by the storm of April 2nd. From that time till his rescue on April 12th, the man remembers little, and he does not even recall when William Bryden, his companion, died. Bryden's death reveals no apparent cause and was probably due to excitement or exposure. Cable advances from Dunedin report that the Alert was a well-known island trader and bore an evil reputation along the waterfront. It had set sail in great haste just after the storm and the earth tremors of March 1st. The Admiralty will institute an inquiry on the whole matter beginning tomorrow, at which every effort will be made to induce Johansen to speak more freely than he has done hitherto. That was all. But what a train of ideas it began in my mind. This was new treasuries of data on the Cthulhu cult, as well as evidence that they had interests at sea, as well as on land. What was this strange island on which 6 men died, and of which Johansen was so secretive? What had the Vice Admiralty's investigation brought out? And most marvelous of all, what deep and more than natural linkage of dates was this, which gave such malign and undeniable significance to the series of events to which I was already privy. March 1st, the earthquake and storms come. From Dunedin, the crew of the Alert dart eagerly forth, as if imperiously summoned, while on the other side of the world, a young sculptor molds in his sleep the form of the dreaded Cthulhu. March 22nd, the crew of the Emma land on an unknown island, leaving 6 men dead, while our young sculptor lapses into delirium. And what of the storms of April 2nd? The very day Wilcox emerged unharmed from his bondage of strange fever. Was I tottering on the brink of cosmic horrors beyond man's power to bear? If so, they were horrors of the mind alone, but in some way, the 2nd of April had put a stop to whatever monstrous menace had begun its siege on mankind's soul. That afternoon, after a hurried day of cabling and arranging, I bid my host adieu and boarded a train bound for San Francisco. In less than a month, I was in Dunedin, where I learned little was known about the strange cult members who had lingered by the sea taverns. In Auckland, I learned that Johansen had sold his cottage and traveled with his wife to his old home in Oslo. I I set out at once for the Norwegian capital. I arrived one autumn day at the thin wharves in the shadow of the Egerberg. Johansen's address, I discovered, was in the old city of King Harald Hardrada. I made the brief trip by taxicab and knocked with palpitating heart at the door of a neat and ancient building. A sad-faced woman dressed in black answered my summons, and I was stung with disappointment as she told me in halting English that Gustav Johansen was no more. The doings at sea in 1925 had broken him, his wife said. He'd never told her any more than he'd told the public. But he had left behind a long manuscript written in English, evidently to safeguard her from the perils of casual perusal. Johansen's death, like that of Negras and his men, had occurred suddenly and without explanation. I now felt gnawing at my vitals the dark terror which shall never leave me till I too am at rest, accidentally or otherwise. Persuading the widow that my connection with her husband was sufficient enough to entitle me to his manuscript, I bore the document away and returned to London. It is a simple, rambling thing. A naive sailor's attempt at a post facto diary, striving to recall day by day that awful last voyage. I will not submit you to it in verbatim with all of its cloudiness and redundancy, but I will give you the gist, enough to show why the sound of the water against the vessel's sides became so unendurable I stopped my ears with cotton. Johansen, thank God, did not know quite all. But I shall never sleep calmly again when I think of the horror which waits behind time and space, and of the unhallowed blasphemies dreaming beneath the sea, known and favored by a nightmare cult, ready and willing to loose them upon the world. Johansen's voyage began just as he told the Vice Admiralty. The ship was making good progress when it was held up by the Alert on March 22nd. And you can feel the mate's regret as he writes of her bombardment and sinking. Of the swarthy cult fiends, he writes with significant horror. There was a particularly abominable quality about them which made their destruction seem almost a duty. Then, driving forward in their captured yacht under Johansen's command, the men, lost for days, finally sighted a single stone pillar sticking out of the sea, and came upon a coastline of mingled mud, ooze, and weedy cyclopean architecture which can be nothing less than the tangible substance of Earth's supreme terror, the nightmare corpse city of Relay. There lay Cthulhu and his hordes in slimy green vaults, sending out at last, after cycles incalculable, the thoughts which spread fear, calling imperiously to the faithful to come on a pilgrimage of liberation and restoration. I suppose only a single mountaintop, the hideous monolith-capped citadel wherein Cthulhu himself lay buried, actually emerged from the waters. When I think of the extent of all which may be brooding down there, I almost want to kill myself forthwith. Johansen and his men were awed by the cosmic majesty of this dripping Babylon of elder demons, awed by the unbelievable size of these Titan stone blocks, the dizzying heights of this great carven monolith, and the stupefying identities of the statues in bas-reliefs. The city itself is undescribable in terms familiar and human. Surfaces too vast to belong to anything good and proper on this earth, with hideous images and hieroglyphics. And as Wilcox had hinted at, the geometry of the place was abnormal, non-Euclidean, loathsomely redolent of spheres and dimensions apart from ours. Johansen and his men landed on a sloping mud bank of this monstrous acropolis, and they clambered slipperily over tight and oozy blocks. There were no mortal staircase. The very sun in heaven seemed distorted when viewed through the polarizing miasma welling up from this sea-soaked perversion. And twisted menace and suspense lurked leeringly behind every crazily elusive angle, where a second glance showed concavity after a first had shown convexity. Something very much like fear overcame all the men before anything more than rock, ooze, and weed had been seen. And each of the men would have fled had he not feared the scorn of the others. Finally, Rodriguez, the Portuguese, climbed up to the foot of the monolith and shouted down what he found. The others quickly followed him, and all looked curiously at this immense stone portal, bearing a very familiar squid dragon bas relief. It was like a great barn door, yet the men could not decide if it lay flat like a trapdoor or slantwise like an outside cellar door. As Wilcox had said, the geometry of the place was all wrong. One could not be sure the sea or the land were horizontal, hence the relative position of anything else was phantasmically variable. Bryden pressed on the stone in several places without result. Then Donovan felt over gently all along the edge, pressing each point as he went. He climbed interminably along that grotesque stone molding, and all the men wondered how any door in the universe could be so vast. Then, softly, slowly, the acre-great portal began to give inwardly at the top, and they saw that it was balanced. Donovan slid or somehow propelled himself down or along the jamb and rejoined the others, and everyone watched the queer recession of this monstrous portal. In this fantasy of prismatic distortion, it moved anomalously in a diagonal way, such that all the rules of matter and perspective were upset. The aperture was black, with a darkness almost material. It obscured parts of the inner wall which should have been revealed, and actually burst forth like smoke from its eons-long imprisonment, visibly darkening the sun as it slunk away through the shrunken and gibbous sky on flapping membranous wings. This odor, now emanating from the newly opened depths, was intolerable. And at length, the quick-eared Hawkins thought he heard a nasty slopping sound down there. Everyone listened. And everyone was listening still when it lumbered slobberingly into sight, graspingly squeezing its gelatinous green immensity through the black doorway into the poisoned outside air of this tainted city of madness. Of the 6 men that never made it back to the boat, 2 perished of pure fright in that single accursed instant. The thing cannot be described. There are no words for such sinister and immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions between matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or lumbered. God, what wonder half a world away the young sculptor raved in fever at this telepathic incident. The thing of the idols, the green sticky spot of the stars, had risen to claim its own. What an age-old cult had failed to do by design, a band of innocent sailors had done by accident. Great Cthulhu was loose again. 3 of the men were swept up in the flabby claws before anyone turned. God help them if there be any help in this universe. A 4th slipped while the others plunged across endless vistas of green-crusted rock towards the boat, and he was swallowed up by an angle of masonry that should not have been there. And so only Bryden and Johansen reached the launch boat, and they pulled desperately for the Alert, whilst behind them that monstrous, nameless monstrosity flopped down the slimy green stones and then floundered, hesitating, at the edge of the water. It was the work of a few brief moments of running up and down between the wheel and the engine to get the Alert underway again. Finally, slowly, amidst the distorted horror of that unimaginable scene, she began to churn the lethal waters, whilst on the charnel shores of masonry that were not of this earth, the Titan thing slavered and gibbered like Polyphemus cursing the fleeing ship of Odysseus. Then, braver than that storied Cyclops, great Cthulhu slid greasily into the waters and began to pursue with great wave-raising strokes. Bryden looked back and went mad, laughing hysterically. He continued to laugh intermittently throughout until death found him in his cabin. But Johansen had not given out just yet. Knowing full well that thing would surely overtake the Alert, he resolved on a desperate chance, and, setting the engine at full speed, ran lightning-like on deck and reversed the wheel. There was a mighty eddying and foaming in the noisome brine, and as the steam mounted higher and higher, that brave Norwegian drove his vessel head-on toward the pursuing jelly, which rose above the unclean froth like the stern of a demon galleon. Its awful squid-like head with the facial feelers came nearly up to the bowsprit of the sturdy yacht, but Johansen drove on relentless. There was a bursting as of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness as of a cloven sunfish, the stench of 1,000 open graves, and a sound a chronicler would not put down on paper. Then, for an instant, the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green smoke. And then there was only a venomous seething astern where, God in heaven, the scattered plasticity of that nameless monstrosity was nebulously recombining into its original hateful form. As the distance widened while the Alert gained impetus from her mounting steam and left the abomination behind. Johansen did not attempt to navigate after that first bold fight, the result having taken something out of his soul. After that came the storms of April 2nd, and a gathering of clouds over his consciousness. Out of those dreams came rescue. The vigilant, the Vice Admiralty's court, the streets of Dunedin, and the long voyage to his home by the Egerberg. So ends Johansen's tale. I shall place his manuscript in a box, along with the statue, bas relief, all the rest of my research, and I shall bury it someplace very, very deep. This has been a test of my sanity. I have seen all which the universe has to hold in horror, and henceforth even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer will be naught but poison to me. I do not believe I shall have long to wait. As the grass went, as Johansen went, so too shall I. I know too much, as do all of you, and the cult still lives. Cthulhu still lives too, I suppose, once again in the chasm which has sheltered him since the sun was young. His accursed city has sunken beneath the waves once again, but his ministers on earth continue to bellow and prance and slay around idle-top monoliths in Earth's lonely places. Loathsomeness waits in the deep, and decay spreads over the tottering cities of man. A day will come when we... No, I cannot think like that. I cannot think. Instead, I pray that when they come for me, and I too am silenced, that you, my witnesses, choose caution over audacity and ensure that this baleful tale meet no other ear. You know that which is forbidden, a terrible secret, jealously guarded by the most dangerous of men. Run! I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy, perhaps consider a donation to the Music Hall to help Tarrytown Music Hall during the most difficult time of its history. We could use all the help that we can get. Thank you very much, and have a gloriously insane evening.